Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel, and let's get an update on the lawsuit. So, I promise y'all if I see anything, I'd throw it up, so let's go. Okay, this is on Friday13th.com. Friday 13th Rights Battle Update with Victor Miller rebuttal and possible verdict. As you mentioned back in July, the deadline for Victor Miller to file his rebuttal brief to Sean Cunningham's appeal for the Friday 13th rights was yesterday, and entertainment copyright lawyer Larry Zerner had a nice update via Twitter. Miller's brief in the Friday 13th appeal was filed late last night. There was no real surprise for those of you who don't remember. Victor won at trial on summary judgment. The court ruled that when Victor wrote the Friday 13th script, he did so as a work for hire. Horror Inc., Sean Cunningham's company, appealed the ruling. In order to win, Sean has to convince the appellate court that Victor Miller was an employee when he wrote the script and not an independent contractor. To that end, in his opening brief, Sean put forth the novel theory that because Victor Miller's contract was under Writers Guild Association jurisdiction, Victor must automatically be considered an employee because only employees can be covered under union contracts. And Victor's brief deals with basically calling it, being ridiculous, having no legal support, not being in line with U.S. copyright law. The rest of the brief covers the normal arguments over the fact that, taking into account when an author is employed or an independent contractor in the U.S. law, it is fairly stated and tracks with what was argued in trial court. And basically, Larry Zerner for you to hear, he says, what happens next? Well, Sean will file a reply brief by 9/28. The court will schedule oral arguments probably in January, February 2020. We would then most likely have a decision in May or June of 2020, guys. Keep in mind that the court does what it wants, and these are only educated guesses. So basically, nothing new, and it looks like it's going to be 2020 before anything even gets done. So moving on to the Hollywood Reporter had this interesting article. Let me read this thing. I'll leave a link for this, but this is dealing with interesting argument going on with the Friday 13th. And basically, are screenwriter employees or independent contractors? The Second Circuit Court of Appeal hears debate. A recent legal victory Friday 13th, screenwriter Victor Miller against producer Horror Inc. Classic is now before the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, and rather unexpectedly, a copyright fight has become in part a question about the continued worth of unions. They're exploiting the provisions of copyright law that allows authors, after waiting 35 years, to reclaim copyright material by terminating grants. Which, last summer, Connecticut court federal judge rejected producers, contended that Friday 13th was a work made for hire, and basically went after them. Since ruling, the two sides have been unable to settle their differences, to the frustration of basically us, who awaits a reboot, sequels, and video games. Companies associated with producer Sean Cunningham are having a federal appellate court take another look at this dispute and make an argument that it is much more about labor law as it is intellectual property. And sorry about that, I was rolling around. According to the producer, represented by the highly respected appellate team, including Kathleen Sullivan and whatever, it matters that when Miller penned the Friday 13th screenplay, he was a member of the Writers Guild of America. They tell the Second Court that the terms of the Writers Guild of America collective bargaining agreement make clear that a screenwriter writing a screenplay is an employee, and as a WGA member for 4 decades, Miller got benefits, salary, everything. So I could argue that Miller can't suddenly turn around now and claim being an independent contractor entitled to cancel transfers of Friday 13th rights. Then, after proclaiming how the district court ignored all this, comes an argument intended to spook the appellate courts. The producer believes that when Congress copyrighted law, it considered and rejected an approach that always treats screenwriters as independent contractors vested with rights that could shop to studios, not when work made for hire rules were specifically written to include works prepared by an employee within the scope of his employment. Moreover, the producer asserts this creates conflict within the Labor blah 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 Act This grants employees the right to organize or join labor unions and to bargain collectively, to be both a union-covered employee and an independent contractor at the same time while performing a single function is out of the realm of square of thought. So that's what they're arguing. And basically, he's saying Miller can't have it both ways. Now, we get down here to appellate brief, which I'll leave a link to it too, then makes this statement predicament. If upheld, the district court's decision threatens to undermine both the ability of screenwriters to collectively bargain and the expectations of employers that have engaged in collective bargaining to nearly a century, almost certainly leading employers to challenge whether the WGA can continue to organize and collectively bargain on behalf of screenwriters. In fact, such a finding will beg the question, are all employees who work on films actually independent contractors? If so, the district court's decision may inevitably set the stage for the decertification of all union governing in the film industry, which is one of the largest unionized private sector industries in the United States. This all comes as California legislature wrestles with whether to reclassify independent contractors as employees in the gig community. Well, that's a separate issue. In the meantime, is the producer of Friday the 13th right? Is there about to be a massive upheaval sideways? On Tuesday, Miller's attorney, Mark Toberoff, took a shot at poking a hole in the producer's logic. His opening brief, which I'll leave a link to it, includes a trip down the Hollywood memory lane back to 1938 when the rights of screenwriters to collectively bargain was recognized by the National Labor Relations Board. Members of the labor union are free to work as an independent contractor, states the brief, and guilds such as the Writers Guild, those other guys negotiate the working conditions of independent contractors too. While the NLRB decides 80 years ago that writers are employees because producers had ultimate power over the work, Miller's brief says that this came as a much different time, also known as the old studio system, where a small number of vertically integrated studios produced movies using creative personnel, including screenwriters, on long-term employee contracts. Writers in those days punched a clock and sat in cubicles, like me, worked all day, and then I walked out. So yes, nearly all Hollywood writers might today be deemed independent contractors, continues the brief, but that doesn't mean that they can't also be part of a union negotiating their working conditions. There's no need to cause for alarm, as the latest Friday 13th Court of Appeal appellants never explained why. Affirming the judgment in this case could prompt screenwriters to petition for decertification elections, or why the Writers Guild of America would lose them. Or most importantly, what any of this has to do with the Copyright Act. And some appellants are proposing to abandon the Supreme Court's and the court's settled rule of law of copyright law and replace them with labor law rules that do not exist. And they imagine this to be necessary based on historical events taken out of context and to avoid events. Oh, this is all messed up. So, I will leave a link for this. Basically, trying to summarize this a little easier. But Sean Cunningham's basically saying, you're an employee of the Writers Guild of America. You get up, you go to work 9 to 5. I paid you to do the job. You did the job. That should be it. And he's saying he wasn't independent. And the way it's looked at, so he paid him to do a job, and he didn't do the work for hire on the contract, which that's Sean's fault. But Victor Miller, if I'm reading this correct, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm not a lawyer, by the way, let's get that out of the way. I'm not, just my opinion. But Victor Miller is saying, he wants his rights back thanks to this law because he's saying he was independent. But Horror Inc., Sean Cunningham said, no, that's not the way it was. So I don't know how this is going, really. I don't know the whole deal. I'm reading 2 lawyers, which I trust lawyers about as far as I can throw them. Sorry, guys. But this is a messy thing. And honestly, I know it's about money, but I swear there's more going on behind the scenes. I think it's a lot more egos going on. I'm just reading between the lines, seeing whose is bigger is all I can figure. But leave your comments. What do you think about all this? So, it's messy. And like I said, don't expect anything soon. It's going to be 2020. If we're lucky, something might get sick. But that's what's going on right now. And like I promised you guys, if I see anything, I'll throw it up for you. Whether it's good or bad, I'll throw it up. Also, if you want to watch the Scream reboot, it is on Netflix now, guys. It came out on the 1st. So go check that out also. And there is 3 more Friday 13th movies coming out. Fan made's coming out here. I think 1 or 2 of them it's this month. I think Jason Rising, I think Voorhees is coming out. So get ready for them. Alrighty, guys. That's enough of my rambling and talking, and y'all have a good night.